Ottawa met Justin Rutter through a police description of the last time he was seen. On October the 10th, 2009, a Saturday story in the Ottawa Citizen told readers that the 14-year-old had never before stayed away from home overnight. They were asked to keep an eye out for the slim Caucasian teenager with light brown hair and brown eyes. He was last seen by a friend Thursday night before they parted ways on Cote Street near St. Laurent Boulevard. Justin Rutter was living in Ottawa, Ontario on Murray Street when he vanished on October the 8th, 2009. He had walked across the street to the Petro Jules Morin Park area where he had been hanging out with friends. This area is described as a rough neighborhood. On October the 9th, 2009, Jay Rutter woke up before the rest of her family. She looked in on her children and Justin wasn't in his bed. Immediately, I knew that there was something wrong, said Jay, his mother, who recalls picking up the phone and calling the police. The second thing I did is I called my mother and I apologized. I never knew what it felt like, she said. Like her youngest son, Justin, Jay didn't have the picture-perfect childhood. Her dad left and her mom, a single parent, worked a lot, prompting a teenage Jay to up and leave home without an explanation on more than one occasion. Her mother used to go downtown with pictures of Jay searching for her daughter. Now a mother herself, Jay experienced firsthand the feelings that set in when one's child is suddenly, unexplainably absent. For Justin, this wasn't a pattern, but it wasn't entirely out of character either. Affectionately, Jay describes Justin as a pain in the butt. If he could do something to frighten me or get a rise out of me, he did it. He was a very active child. He was not a gamer. He was definitely a natured kid, outdoors, climbing, getting into mischief with his siblings or friends, probably doing something he wasn't supposed to do. And trouble wasn't hard to find in the Rutters' lower town neighborhood. They lived on Murray Street, in the projects, as Jay called it. We saw a lot of broken people, but even those broken people knew my son and thought he was an amazing kid. Justin was a bit of a paradox, streetwise but soft-hearted, mischievous but also empathetic, and devoted to his family. Still boyish-looking yet capable of putting on that swagger that seems to belong uniquely to teenagers. At age 14, he was still figuring out who he was. That night, I was driving around looking for him, Jay remembers. I was so consumed with this overwhelming feeling that I would never ever see him again. I don't know what that meant, but that's how I felt. His family has been devastated and his mother left to question her son's fate, and if Justin really did run away. It's a possibility that offers hope, however slim, that he could be alive somewhere. Jay hasn't decided what fate she believes befell her son. Probably not as bad as I imagine. I have nightmares every night. I don't sleep. I haven't slept in 10 years, like really slept, Jay said. Early on, the officers assigned to the case were from the Force's Youth Intervention and Diversion section on OPS branch, which is the Ontario Police Service, that investigated juvenile missing persons reports at that time. Those investigators from the youth section, they're used to dealing with troubled kids and runaway teens and that kind of thing. When they see an investigation, they tend to think a certain way. They're used to dealing with it that way, said Jean-Luc Bonin, a patrol sergeant with the Ottawa Police. The big challenge with teenagers, of course, is that being missing is a voluntary way, what gets sometimes called runaway kids, as a result of family conflict that is statistically the most common reason for kids being missing, and so much more common than foul play, then it does tend to be the hypothesis of choice among law enforcement and other people trying to solve it. He said, "It sounds like there was a fair amount of evidence that this was, at least initially, a voluntary absence." Indeed, Justin had some street smarts living where he did. He started high school and, according to his mom, was having a hard time with it. He wasn't going to class and she suspects now he was smoking pot. Jay was trying to get him back on track, but there's only so much control a parent can exert over their teenager. "I've never tried to be on a line where there was no give with any of my kids," she said. "I've tried to always have some flexibility with choices that they made, even bad ones, because you never want your kids to think back that they've gone so far that there's no coming back. There's always a door here," his mother said. "Obviously, there's a reason he doesn't want to go home," his grandmother, Deanne Belos, told the Citizen. "The important thing is that the police find him and that he gets the help that he needs." With such compelling evidence to suggest Justin had fled home and was somewhere on the streets of Ottawa, it was baffling that police and family weren't able to pin the 14-year-old down. Justin had asked her to go to the park, Jay remembers, saying he wouldn't be back until late. "If he was going to run away, why would he ask me?" she questions. "I never said, 'I love you, Mom. I'll see you later.' When I was running away from home, I went out my window. My mom didn't even know I was gone," she claims. It's one item on the list of arguments against the runaway theory. There's also the fact that Justin didn't have a habit of doing so, was close with all of his family members, and had the option of staying elsewhere if he needed a break from home. Children that run away from home, usually it's a drip at first, and then it becomes a trickle, and then a stream, and then they're just gone. It sometimes happens that they just up and leave, but it's really uncommon for them to just take a stab at running away from home and disappear off of the face of the earth. Even if it is a runaway, it's still a serious thing. He's 14 years old, but it still takes away from the fact that the child is missing. I think in my experience anyhow, and any runaway would have come back one way or another, or we would have had police contact somehow. We would have had something leading down a different path, even just to know he was okay. Jay provided startling detail that the day Justin disappeared, he's believed to have been involved in a physical altercation with another teenager. As Jay tells it, the youth came up to her son while he was sitting at a table in the lower town's Jules Morin Park. He was much larger than Justin and beat him up. She knows this because someone captured the incident on a phone camera and the police obtained the footage. Jay couldn't bring herself to watch it, but Justin's father did. Reporting from the Time corroborates Jay's account when Justin went missing sometime after 8 p.m. after getting into the fight with the boy at the Lower Town Park. He left the park alone and was headed west toward the Byward Market. "It's a big loose end for us," Jay said. I guess, given the relative possibilities that suicide or accidental death is more likely than criminal homicide, but it could be criminal homicide too. Jay doesn't think that Justin would have harmed himself, because he was such a liver of life, but at the same time, she can't know for sure. The weeks leading up to Justin's disappearance were difficult ones. He had ADHD, and unlike elementary school, where he was surrounded by supportive people, the high school he started at was not a good fit, Jay remembers. He wasn't showing up, and she registered him in a new school not long before his disappearance. Though she remembers hearing about she doesn't remember hearing about any bullying at the new school. Her son was still struggling. They discussed it in one of their last conversations, and she said, "I know you're having a hard time, but we'll go together to the school and figure it out on Monday." During his time with the missing person unit, Sergeant Bowden worked actively with a number of other organizations, including the coroner's office and his federal and provincial counterparts, to try to match up unidentified remains found in the Ottawa region with unsolved cases. Several were ultimately identified, but not Justin's. That said, there are hundreds of remains across the country, Bowden noted, and ongoing efforts to match bodies with names. One such initiative is the National Missing Persons DNA Program, launched in 2018, that allows for the collection and comparison in a national databank of DNA profiles from unidentified remains, missing persons, and family members who volunteer to submit their own biological samples as of June 2020. The program had helped identify remains in 6 investigations, according to the RCMP. Of course, a positive ID first requires finding a body to identify, and while it's certainly still possible in Justin's case after all these years, Bonin acknowledged that it isn't a guaranteed outcome. In a forensic mindset, you'll never find a scientist that will say, yes, we will find all the bodies. If there was a credible information that Justin was likely to be found anywhere, I don't think there would have been anything that would have stopped a search, said Bonin. It's what we do. It's how we find missing people. Ottawa police requests for searches, whether for a piece of evidence or a missing person, they have to go through a certain command that considers the circumstances, potential costs, and probabilities of success, Bonin explained. And when it comes to police investigations in general, he said they can't work a case by its what-ifs. We are 100% evidence-led, so if the evidence is pointing us in a certain direction, we will follow that. But that being said, especially in missing persons, there's really an absence of evidence that we have to work with. This reality offers little solace to a family that's gone years without an answer, even the most horrifying one. Justin's unexplained absence has already caused irreparable damage. Her son was like the glue that brought loved ones together, said Jay, a magnet between members of the family who otherwise struggled to get along. Everyone felt like they had a special relationship with Justin, and after he was gone, the family just imploded. For his mother, the loss has been profound. In the early days, Jay turned to painkillers and isolation. Any photos of Justin had to be put away. She broke off ties and barely talked to her own family for years. Her faith has helped some, but happiness has been hard to come by. Jay believes more support needs to be made available to families like her own, who have had children disappear. That, I think, would make a big difference in helping us handle feelings, she says. Instead, you're kind of stuck in arrested development. You just kind of don't change from that, she says. You're just still there. She's not in contact with the police anymore. The last few times she tried to get in touch, she said no one called her back. And her sense is that Justin's case wasn't really investigated anymore. I don't know if they did their job. I just don't feel like they didn't. I just feel like they didn't, and I feel like my child wasn't important, she said. Their job is to serve and protect us, and they didn't serve and protect us. They did not protect my child. There's a fundamental imbalance at the heart of the relationship between the families of long-term missing children and the police responsible for their cases. While police have to divide their attention between all the files on their caseload, families are understandably focused on finding their missing loved one. It's often a very frustrating process if police can't produce answers, said Lindsay Loeb, Policing Relations Liaison for the Canadian Centre Protection, a national charity. And while families may feel that police have failed them, I think the difficulty with that is that unless your child is located, you're never going to feel like it's good enough, said Loeb. There are also legitimate reasons why police can't or won't give families all the information they might want about open missing cases, and the efforts being taken to try and solve them, according to Bonin. While working on Justin's case, he never spoke to the family. He didn't want to provide the false impression that he could devote all of his time to it, nor reopen old wounds when nothing had changed. There's also the idea of hold back evidence. If someone was killed or abducted, for example, information that only the police and the perpetrator know is incredibly important. Frustrating as it may be, Bonin said, the reality is that until he's found, Justin's family won't have access to the case file, and so they're left to live with unanswered questions, largely in the dark, about the facts of the investigation into Justin's disappearance. Jay has her doubts about whether it was handled properly, and history provides some justification for her concerns. In the research literature, missing persons and best practices for police responses to missing persons is very understudied, and it's underfunded, said Lorna Ferguson, a policing researcher and doctorate student at the Western University who has consulted for police agencies across the country. Justin lives in Jay's memory as a deeply kind 14-year-old boy who loved old horror movies, skateboarding, and Ziggy's Stardust era. Bowie. Justin or his remains have not been located to this day. Justin Rutter was born on May the 6th, 1995, and is 5'3" tall, weighing approximately 110 pounds. He has light brown hair and brown eyes. Anyone with information about him is asked to contact the Ontario Police Service Missing Persons Unit at 613-236-1222, extension 2355 during business hours, or at 613-236-1222, extension 7300 for 24-hour assistance. Anonymous tips can go through Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477, and a $5,000 reward remains available for information confirming Justin's current whereabouts or leading to the arrest and prosecution of the person or persons responsible for his disappearance.